So what's our approach? The leading question we start with is, what kind of creatures are we? As human beings, what kind of creatures are we? There's a lot of mileage to be gained from thinking about that question. So, as a thought experiment, imagine the lights going out. And when I say the lights going out, I mean the lights going out permanently. Some of you might have been watching TV recently and you will have seen the television program Revolution, which asks this question: what kind of creatures are human beings, and how do you find out what kind they are? Take away the accoutrements of civilization, of technology, and let's see what they are. And what kind of creature are we? We're tribal creatures. We affiliate with our families first, with our local communities second, and it's very difficult for us to be able to connect with people who are other or different than us. So we're built right from the beginning, in a certain sense, to be prejudiced against the task of coming to terms with difference. To be able to do that has to be learned. It's a skill that takes a lot of effort and energy to learn to be able to accommodate difference, to learn to be able to connect with people who are different. That is a very long and complicated journey, and the answer to the what kind of creatures are we, you're going to see here presently presented by another one of our members. But before we get there, I don't want you to get lost in the details, so I just want to tell you what our simple message is. It's not blank. I'm actually going to press a key in a moment. It's a little dramatic moment, isn't it? When you see this blank screen and you wonder, when we know what kind of creatures we are, we have a chance to understand each other and to empathise with each other, if we want to take that chance. Not everyone does, but even if you want to take that chance, you just can't if you don't know about the other people. Understanding-based empathy is the key to uniting ideologically diverse people and living communities of trust. This phrase that Amy introduced, understanding-based empathy, is the heart and soul of our message to you today. It's the fundamental answer for what it would take for liberal Christians and conservative Christians to do church together. So, picture this. Do you know how to explain your ideological opponent to your opponent so that they evaluate your explanation? Can you do it deeply, accurately, sympathetically, so that you disarm them, so that they feel understood? And in the same way, have you ever felt deeply, accurately understood by an ideological opponent? You see, if that happens to you even once in your life, it's life-changing. You realise that there's a possibility there, that across this vast divide, we can actually reach out to one another. And even though you keep disagreeing, you feel bonded to one another. It's an amazing feeling, but you can't fake it. You actually have to know stuff to pull it off. That's why it's understanding-based empathy. We're not talking about hand-holding, I'll support you and cook your meals while your husband's in hospital empathy. That's terrifically important. We're talking about understanding people's deepest convictions about politics, morality, and religion, and you just can't make that stuff up off the cuff. You have to do your homework to figure out what it is. So it can't be faked because it requires serious knowledge. It's easy to achieve in this heart-to-heart, intense, Esalen Institute, encounter group, break my heart kinds of empathy. That kind of empathy might be great, but it's exhausting, and you really can't expect to build a community when empathy costs you that much energy. You go home from an encounter group and you can't function for a week because you're just completely washed out. If that's what it takes, we'll never get liberal Christians and conservative Christians together in the same community. There has to be a more energy-efficient way. Understanding-based empathy is that way. It works with ideological enemies as well as with allies. It's realistic about the deep differences between people because it's not asking for agreement, it's asking for understanding. And it helps people feel closely bonded without having to agree with one another. And Chapin's story, I've been in that church a number of times. It's really true. You've got people who are deeply opposed ideologically. They're with each other in community meetings. They share the Eucharist together. They sit in church together. They pray for each other. They check in with each other about how their family crises are going. They are bonded. And they're bonded because they've learned to understand one another in the light of the way the preaching and the worship and the sacraments and the service go inside that community. So what sort of understanding produces empathy? What do you actually have to know? Our research yields valuable insights. Most importantly, conservatives and liberals, they need one another. Conservatives know how to stabilise groups. They know how to find the tradition paths that make it easy for groups to stay, as easy as possible for groups to stay solid and strong. But the downside of that type of life is a lack of responsiveness, and people who don't fit the mould of the group's pattern feel marginalised. So you also need liberals who prize human-heartedness, who prize well-being, who put the health and the welfare of people above rules and traditions and whatnot. Now, if you have one without the other, you have a kind of either a stodgy routine which marginalises people who are different, or you have a chaotic, crazy environment in which you don't have enough stability to be able to grow children in a way that makes parents feel safe. Right? It's just wacky. But together, they can actually form communities, and their characteristics contribute to one another. Now, I can say that. The question is, does research back that up? Can you actually find out about those characteristics? And the answer is that you can. Moderates. If you do your surveys, here's what you discover. Your 9-point political scale, these are your liberals, these are your conservatives, these are your extreme liberals, your liberals leaning, or we'll just do 7. Yeah. Sorry. These are your moderates in the middle. Chalk is breakable, conservative, liberal. This group of people who are either moderate, or they're moderate leaning left, or moderate leaning right. If you had to judge how many they were just in this country based on airtime, what would you say? You don't hear from them very much, do you? But how many are there? 65%, almost 2/3 of the country are in the middle there. Why are they in the middle? Instinctively they know that there's something right about those conservative instincts. There's something right about those liberal instincts. They get it. Internally, they understand that both sides have something to offer. And they want to be able to have the freedom to press on one side or the other, depending on the situation. It's a principled form of moderate ideological belief in politics and in religion. It's exactly the same. Now, a lot of people are in the middle because they're confused, because they're scared to take a stand. At least that's what you'd have to believe if you listen to the extremes who criticise moderates for being chicken, for being too scared to stand up for something. But when I talk to moderates, and in our research when we investigated moderates in depth, we discovered something completely different. A very profound, pervasive intuition that people have. They don't know how to name it, they don't know how to describe it, they're not very articulate about it, but if you lead them in the right way, so that you give them the language and the categories to explain themselves, they're saying they are convinced about the values of both sides, and they want the freedom to be able to assert one side or the other depending on the situation. Principled form of moderate ideology. Religious and political ideology is partially heritable. Did you know that? Fabulous twin research lies behind this, about 50%. Ideological preferences depend on temperament. Personality links are very important. They stabilise around 25. You've got to get people out of the home nest, and you've got to finish their brain development, and that doesn't really happen, especially for males, until about the age of 25. So that's when you actually start figuring out what your ideology is. Conservatism increases with experience. You might say it increases with age. I think it might be better to say it increases with experience. The issue there is when you see enough countries fall, enough civil wars, enough terrorist attacks, you realise that that stuff really sucks. What you really want is enough stability commensurate with your desires as a parent and a grandparent and a community member to be able to have the freedom to explore life without having to worry about what might happen to you or your children. That's why conservatism increases with experience. And people can be religiously liberal or conservative in different ways. One of the great joys of our research has been to discover that there are at least 3 dimensions of variation in liberals and conservatives, having to do with beliefs, having to do with praxis, having to do with morality. And there are subdimensions within those. So our instrument, if you took this survey in about a month from now, you'll get feedback which says, here is what it means for you to be on the ideological spectrum in these 3 different categories, or in fact 14 different subdimensions. And you come away with a much more nuanced picture of what it means to be left-leaning or right-leaning than you had before. These are discoveries. These aren't speculations, these aren't guesses, these are research-backed insights. With those kinds of insights, you look at people differently than you would otherwise. One of the last comments I'm going to make, ideological personality types. The liberal personality type is very famous by now. It's true in politics, it's true in religion. Liberals, above all, they're open to new experiences, they're creative and curious. They tend to be agreeable, they tend to be extroverted, and they tend to be neurotic, and they're not particularly conscientious. They're the ones with the untidy rooms. They're also the ones who want to get out of town and go explore the world. We need people like that. The conservative personality type, less open to new experience, they like their routines, they're less agreeable, they might be more critical, they might be guarding boundaries more carefully, they're more introverted, but they also are more less neurotic. They are more relaxed, they handle stress better, they marshal social resources for psychological health, and it works. And they're conscientious, reliable, persistent, organised, because they're invested in the social context that they so prize. So these personality types really count. This has something to do with the heritability aspects. These things are heritable to a significant degree. So why do we need one another? Conservatives understand how precious social forms are and how easy they are to lose. They do what it takes to protect society and keep it running efficiently. Liberals understand how precious individual lives are and how easily they can be harmed. They do what it takes to protect individuals and optimise well-being. It shouldn't be surprising to us that the world is this complicated. When you slow down and ask yourself, what kind of creatures are we? The answer is, we're the kind of creatures who are this diverse. And we need one another to be able to function in social groups that are effective. So, Amy's train made it on time, so we can skip right past this slide. I'd like to introduce to you Connor Wood, a doctoral student here who's working quite closely with Professor Cornwall Harris, and his dissertation research is headed in this direction. So I've asked him to explain to you some of the more hard science stuff associated with this. Take it away, Connor.
So I'm going to be talking about the science, but I'm also going to be talking about what the science means. So I will be taking us a little bit further afield from the church-centered talk.
And I may be saying some things that you may or may not agree with, especially towards the end when I start storytelling. But we'll start with the science first. So we have some pretty serious ideological rifts in our culture. They're deep and they're wide. For about 60 years, researchers have been seriously investigating these differences in order to develop better understanding of them, so that we can reach across these divides to each other.
One thing to keep in mind, though, is that almost all this research has been done by professors, who are the most liberal single profession in the country, according to the General Social Survey. What this turns out to mean in practice is that there's been a lot of really good research produced over the past 60 years, and at the same time, that research has also mostly been professors wondering what the heck is wrong with conservatives and how we can fix them.
Really?
We're trying to do something different, obviously, as you've heard. And so my job is to tell a little bit about the actual underlying patterns and behavioral traits that end up being expressed as what we call liberal or conservative once they make it to the level of culture. So as Professor Wilder just said, one of the most reliable, in fact the most reliable single finding in the personality studies of liberals and conservatives is that liberals have much, much higher openness to new experience. Conservatives have much higher, in general, conscientiousness. Now, these other personality dimensions also line up in different ways, but these are the two that really, really diverge strongly. One of the other findings is that conservatives tend to have an orientation, a personal orientation, that's a little bit more local. Liberals tend to occupy and live in more cosmopolitan settings where more different cultures interact and bump up against each other on a daily basis. What that means in practice is that if you're a conservative and you're living in a local environment, you don't get a lot of contact necessarily with other cultures and other belief systems that make your belief look less credible, right? There's a quote backing that up. More response orientation is restricted to the local community, the more likely he or she is to have literalistic orthodox belief and to participate in congregational worship and activities. I'm going to go a little bit fast because I have to, so just keep. Right. So I was working on this lesson. I was like, I gotta get this lesson. Jonathan Haidt, a researcher down at New York University now, believes there are 5 basic moral intuitions that humans come sort of prepackaged with, but the liberals only emphasize 2 of them: the desire to keep from harming each other, and the desire to make sure that interactions are fair within a group. Now, conservatives care also about those things, but they care about all 5 of those dimensions roughly equally, as you can see from the graph. The more conservative you get, the more of the dimensions tend to be thought of equally. The other 3 are loyalty to an in-group, respect for authority, and the desire for purity. Now, if you've got any liberal sort of leanings, especially that last one, but all 3 of those instincts set off like minor alarm bells in your head. Nothing, just a little bit, right? Especially purity, you're like, I don't know. There's some reasons for these differences. As Professor Wyman said, conservatism and liberalism are heritable, especially social and religious conservatism and liberalism. I want to make it clear, we're not really talking about economic liberalism and conservatism here. That's sort of a different construct that in this country happens to line up in a certain way with what we're talking about, and in other countries can line up completely differently. But for social and religious conservatism, conservatives tend to have more active insolence, which is, everybody knows that face. That's an evolutionarily stabilized face. That's a disgust face. That's the part of your brain that tells you when to be disgusted by something that may bring pathogens into your life, right? That may bring disease or badness in. Conservatives also tend to have more active amygdala, which is the fear center. Liberals, on the other hand, tend to have more active anterior cingulate cortices. That's the part of your brain that tells you when things have changed in your environment and it is now time to choose a different strategy. Right? That's the part of your brain that lights up when suddenly you're like, oh, I've been trying this, oh, it's no longer working. Time to switch. Liberals are better at that. And so these differences, physiological and personality, cultural, end up manifesting at the level of culture in ways that are most evident in how they think about and do community. Let me describe how the conservative mindset thinks about community. And yeah, I'm talking in stereotypes. Sorry. Not in a bad way, but we have to talk about trends in order to make sense of the data. So, conservatives have a pretty good understanding of the fact that life on planet Earth is not always super friendly to us. In fact, it's often out intentionally to get us. And we are soft-skinned, hairless, toothless, fangless animals that can't run fast, that can't fly. We're kind of on our own out there, except for the fact that we can do this. Working together in groups is our teeth and our fangs and our claws and our wings. This is what we have as human beings to make the world safe for us to live. But it takes work. If you think about a group, at any given time, there's a temptation for individuals to take more from the group than they give back, right? Or to take from the group and then kind of leave when another better group comes along. So in order for a small group or a tribe to function, it has to have programs and ways of behaving that encourage people to stay with the group day in and day out for years. Richard Sosis, who's a researcher at the University of Connecticut, studied American communes in the 19th century. There were tons. We thought it was the 60s where that really happened. No, it was the 19th century, or all over the place. And Israeli kibbutzes. And found that the more demands a community made on its members, the longer the community lasted. The more sacrifices you had to make, the stronger and more stable the community was in the long term. This is called costly investment theory. This is my picture of somebody saying, like, why weren't you at church on Sunday? Right? Because you have to do it. You have to show up to church, even when you're feeling bored, even when you don't want to do it. Costly investment theory is sometimes used to explain the decline of liberal Protestant churches and the continued success or even growth of more conservative churches that demand more from their members and require more sacrifices. You got to be in a conservative church or group, you have to participate. You have to show up even when you really don't want to. This guy does not want to be there. Ritual is another tool that we have to make groups work. If we were all in this room, if we were all in this room to stand up right now and move our bodies in rhythm together, to clap together, to sing a song, we would literally physiologically be bonded afterwards. And we would be more willing to cooperate and be generous and be altruistic with one another. Ritual motion in synchrony with others releases the brain chemical oxytocin, which is what's released when mothers nurse babies, when people embrace. It's what makes us able to keep committed to a group of people. Although it also makes people outside that group look a little bit less interesting, unfortunately, which is something we'll get to in a second. This is a quote from somebody who drilled as a soldier. Words are inadequate to describe the emotion aroused by the prolonged movement and unison the drilling involved. A strange sense of personal enlargement, a sort of swelling out, becoming bigger than life. This is ritual technology. It's what bonds us. It's what keeps us together. So life is hard, but in groups, see a bowling reference. How did 2 months go? In groups, we can get through it. But this is not a liberal way of thinking, what I've just given you. Right? Since at least the 17th century, liberalism has been associated more with personal autonomy, with individual choices, and with a healthy suspicion and skepticism of authority. Right? So a liberal way of thinking is if somebody comes in and says, like, you got to show up at church every Sunday and you got to do this ritual that doesn't look like it makes sense. Right? The liberal response is to say, like, no. You need to tell me why, because I'm the master of the decisions I make. I'm not going to outsource my decisions to the group. Because a liberal is a person who values individual freedom and who is alive to the dangers inherent in all forms of power and authority. This is what a liberal sees when they see a person or a group of people marching together down the street in unison. Those groups bonding, the more tightly the group is bonded, the more those grooves of relationship are worn down through ritual over the years. The more the people outside of the group don't look like people anymore. This is the fundamental liberal fear. That if you get too invested in one group and the way it works, you'll no longer be able to see when the group is doing something that you can no longer countenance. And that is why the liberal ethos is to question, to think outside the box, to not participate regularly in the rituals. This is why liberal churches tend to have less emphasis on rituals, right? And this is why liberalism in some of the research really has been correlated with creativity. right? Because when you step outside of that warm world, that's when you see what's out there. That's when you see new things, and you can make new connections. Express your individuality. Step out of the line. Now, I'm not trying to say that this is better at all, because you pay a price. Democrats showed higher rates of emotional distress, including higher rates of crying, trait aggression, emotional pain, and lower life satisfaction. They also reported more dissatisfaction with their social support and lower perceived trustworthiness of their relationships. Whereas conservatives reported more favorable impressions of their families and childhood backgrounds than did Democrats. That's what we're trying to say. You pay a price on either side, and it's not like it's not worth it, right? If you're a liberal and you say, no, I just can't buy in all the way to this group because I need to be able to see what's beyond its boundaries, what's on the horizon, it's worth it, but you pay a price. This is also why the sciences tend to be dominated by liberals. People who like to see connections. People who like to think in the abstract, not just in terms of relationships and the down the years continuity of family and children, but want to see what is outside of that continuity. They're also that they can see the big picture, right? It's not just because money is being pumped into advertising that liberals are the ones who are concerned about global warming. That's definitely part of it, right? This is a complicated system. But think about it. You move away from the warm group and its actions, and the horizon appears, and you say, oh my God, this world is so much bigger. Oh my gosh, we're actually affecting the planet. And you can't see that as well when you're enmeshed in the ritual life of a tribe. So I'm going to leave with a metaphor, and I hope it works. It's kind of clunky. I come up with it like 10 midnight last night. So we are on a ship called culture. Inside, it is warm, there is dancing, people are meeting each other, children are running underfoot, there's music. But some people want to know what else there is. And they go out to the prow. And it's rainy out there, and it's cold, and it hurts a little bit. But what they find is something new, new smells that they didn't smell inside in the warm heart of the center of the ship. And they are the ones to see the icebergs first. If we do not learn to understand each other across these lines, the ship of culture is in peril. Liberals are the ones who stand on the prow outside of the warm party of life and are the first ones to see the danger, to say, hey, the ship of culture needs to change direction. Conservatives are the reason there's a ship in the first place. So instead of ending up like this, if we learn what each side offers and the real insights and powerful instincts that both sides have, we have a good shot at sailing safe and warm into the morning. Thank you.